Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video where I'm going to discuss the books that I read in May of 2026 and rank them in order from my least favorite read to my favorite read. Sorry this video is coming out so late. It's about mid-June right now. I know I was waiting until this microphone came in before I made any more videos. I figured it was about time to increase the quality of my audio. I've been making these videos for about a year now. It's been super fun and decided it was time to invest a little bit in some new tech. So thank you for your patience. But let's talk about some books. I read 10 books total in May 2026. 5 of them were physical and 5 of them were audiobooks. Before I rank them, I like to show you guys what I read so that you kind of have an idea of what we're working with. So we'll go over the physical books first. We have Dan Brown's The Lost Symbol. This is book 3 in the Robert Langdon series. We have Stephanie Meyer's Twilight, which was my nostalgia pick of the month. We have my first Stephen Graham Jones book, The Only Good Indians. And then we have 2 Stephen King books. We have Roadwork, which is one of his early novels that he wrote under the Richard Bachman pseudonym. And then we have one of his nonfiction books, which is Dance Macabre. So those are my 5 physical books that I read. The 5 audiobooks that I listened to are Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. I listened to Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. I listened to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. We have Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, which was a reread for me. And then finally, we have Slewfoot by Brom. So those are the 10 books that I will be ranking. I'm going to rank them again in order from my least favorite read to my favorite. And as always, this ranking is going to be based off of my personal enjoyment, not necessarily the ranking or the rating that I gave the books. I feel like that's especially significant in this video because there are a couple books that I gave a higher rating to that are kind of towards the bottom of the list just because they didn't vibe with me very well, or maybe they weren't the genre that I'm the most interested in. So I'll get to there and I'll explain it when we get to those books. But let's get into it. All right, y'all. So coming in 10th place is going to be Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. Back in April, I read her memoir, which is called I'm Glad My Mom Died, and I thought it was an incredible book, an easy 5 out of 5 star read for me. And then I saw that she released this book back in January of 2026, and I decided to check it out. It's a very short read. It was only about a 5-hour audiobook, and I have very mixed feelings on this story. That's kind of the theme for today's video is mixed feelings because that's going to be the case for a lot of these reads, but Half His Age especially left me with very mixed thoughts. So, objectively, I think this book is very well written. I think its characters are extremely well developed and fleshed out. The message that Jeanette McCurdy was trying to get across was this one of um, kind of shaming those in power who take advantage of those underneath them who are more susceptible to their influence. And I think that that is a theme that McCurdy got across very well. The point of this book is to make you feel icky and gross, and I think she achieved that in magnitudes. The problem is that I just did not like the content of this story. So I am a horror enthusiast. I love horror. Usually the content of books does not disturb me very much, but this book had to do with a young teenage girl who gets into a relationship with her 40-year-old English teacher who has a wife and a kid. And, you know, it's obviously an illegal relationship. And I just don't like books that deal with that content. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. I just don't like it. It's a personal preference of mine. But like I said, I think McCurdy achieved what she wanted to. And I think that she did a great job writing this book. The characters are so damaged. Waldo, who is the teenage girl in the story, deals with so many different issues. She has shopping addiction. She has self-image problems. She lives with a mother who has her own slew of problems. She has self-confidence issues. And then Mr. Corgi, the 40-year-old teacher, also is a very damaged individual. And the story is mainly focusing around their relationship and the psychological negative effects that they're having on each other, especially on Waldo, because, you know, Mr. Corgi is an adult. He is taking advantage of her in many instances. And so overall, I think this is a good book. I think it is objectively another win for Jeanette McCurdy when it comes to the quality of her writing. But personally, I just do not like books that have to deal with underage people being in a relationship with an adult. It's just not something that I enjoy very much. So if you are interested in this book, if it sounds like something that you would like to read, if you want to feel uncomfortable, I think this is a great book to check out, but it personally was not it was definitely my least favorite of the month. So that is Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. Coming in at number 9 is Catabasis by R.F. Kuang, another book that I have very mixed feelings about. This book was my book club's pick of the month. My fiance chose this book. She is a huge R.F. Kuang fan. She has read all of R.F. Kuang's books. This is my first R.F. Kuang book. And just to give you an idea, my fiance thinks that this is by far R.F. Kuang's worst book. It's her least favorite of all of the books that she's read. So for me jumping into it as my first book, I don't know if it was the best place to start, but I have mixed feelings about it again. So on one hand, objectively, I think it's very well written. I think the character work in this story is great. I like the two main characters that the story focuses on. I like the premise of the story, but when it comes down to the magic system, that is the aspect of this book that really drew me out of it. So the premise of the story is this. You have two students. Their names are Alice and Peter. They are studying magic at Cambridge. And this isn't like David Blaine street magic. This is like actual magic. And they have a teacher. His name is Professor Grimes. He's like the best in the business, but he's also a really crappy dude. And through a series of accidents, he dies and goes to hell. And he hasn't finished overseeing Peter and Alice's education. They want recommendation letters from him, and so they decide to go into hell on this Dante's Inferno style quest to retrieve their professor's soul, bring him back to the land of the living so he can then write recommendation letters for them. And that setup on its own was really cool. Like the first 10% of this book, I liked a lot. I love the setup. I love that idea of a quest to go get a professor who is not a good dude, but they just really need him to kind of use him for their own ends. So I enjoyed that. The other aspect of this book that I really like are the characters themselves. Alice and Peter, I thought they were very well realized. There are many touching and emotional moments between them. There's a lot of backstory that made me feel very endeared towards them. So I like them as main characters. The aspect of this book that I did not enjoy was the magic system. So the magic system in this book has to do with paradoxes and like philosophical thought experiments. I'm going to be completely honest, I really didn't totally understand it, so I don't feel like I can explain it very well. But R.F. Kuang and these characters go on these very, very long, drawn out segments of the book where they're talking about various paradoxes that they can use to fuel their magic and their spells. And frankly, those sections of the book just went completely over my head. I felt very stupid. I'm not the smartest person in the world. I will admit that. I think there are people out there who are a lot smarter than me who might read this book and think this is the coolest magic system ever. But I did feel a little assured because of the four members of my book club, we all were kind of in a similar boat when it came to the magic system. It was just these long, drawn out paragraphs and pages where we were just like, we're not really sure what's going on here. So the magic system was a miss for me. Everything else I thought was pretty good or great, but unfortunately, those spells were described and those paradoxes were described in such agonizing detail that whenever one of those segments popped up, it completely pulled me out of the story. So, like I said, maybe there are people out there who will really appreciate the story and think that the magic system is super cool and the most awesome thing that they've read. I've certainly seen reviews like that on Fable where people say that it's great, but it just didn't work for me. It didn't work for my fiance. And so that is why this book is ending up lower on the end of my list. I definitely want to check out other R.F. Kuang books. I think that she's one of the best authors out there currently, according to a lot of people. So definitely going to still check out some more of her stuff. But unfortunately, Catabasis was not a win for me. Coming up in eighth place is a book that I think, again, is objectively well written in what it was trying to achieve, but it just wasn't one that I found very entertaining, and that is Dance Macabre by Stephen King. This is a nonfiction book that he wrote in 1980, 1981, I think it was published in, and it's basically Stephen King's thoughts on the horror genre leading up to that point. So he talks a lot about like the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s horror scene. This book reads a lot like a textbook, and so if you're into nonfiction and you're into the horror genre, which I am into the horror genre, I enjoyed reading this book and enjoyed reading a lot about the different things that Stephen King thinks are important to writing a good horror story, the particular works that influenced him and he thinks that have influenced the genre as a whole. Those things were very interesting. It is just it's a very bland read. Like I said, it reads like a textbook, and it took me a good portion of the month to get through. So, the things that this book mainly tackles are Stephen King talks about some of the staples in the horror genre, some properties that he thinks are like the best of the best. He talks about Dracula, he talks about Frankenstein, he discusses Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He goes in depth on the evolution of horror storytelling across multiple mediums. So he talks about radio plays into television shows, into movies, and then there's this big chapter at the end where he discusses 10 horror novels that he thinks are very influential. There's a little bit of autobiographical material in here, like I hinted at, where he talks about what he thinks makes a good horror story and what he thinks has been the most influential on his writing. So, a lot of good stuff here if you're a massive Stephen King fan. If you're just a casual King fan, I think you'll read this and not really enjoy it. Like I said, I think it depends a lot on your personal preferences. Me, I'm not a big nonfiction guy. I totally understand what Stephen King was trying to do with this book. I appreciate it, but it is ending up in number 8 because it just wasn't the most entertaining read. I love fiction. That's where I get my true happiness. And I basically read this one because I want to be a Stephen King completionist. So that is Dance Macabre. Coming in at number 7 is a book that I think nobody needs me to explain what the plot synopsis is. It is Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. Again, this is the video of mixed feelings. I have a lot of history with Twilight, so I read these books like 20 years ago when they first released. I think I was like 10 or 11 years old when this first book came out, and it was such a pop culture icon back in the day. I remember reading these books like upon release. All my friends were talking about them as the movies were releasing in theaters. We would go and see them like opening night or opening weekend. Um, since then, Twilight has definitely fallen off for me, but my fiance loves the Twilight movies. And so we got together about 5 years ago, and we have this yearly tradition where we sit down and we watch all of the Twilight movies. And at first, I was not into it, but as the years have gone on, I've come to appreciate those movies more and more. Not because I think they're incredible movies, but just because I find them very entertaining. It's kind of like those movies that are so bad that they're fun, you know? And I kind of feel the same way about the book. So the book is actually a very easy read. I got through it in like 2 days. It's not the worst writing. Like I kind of went into it with this bias that I thought the writing was going to be terrible. It was not. Like Stephanie Meyer does write an entertaining story. The aspect of this book that just made me roll my eyes so much is the relationship between Bella and Edward is so incredibly toxic that it was just completely unbelievable. Edward is such a jerk throughout 90% of this book, and then the fact that Bella just follows him along blindly with these puppy dog eyes of like, "Oh, Edward, you're so amazing. I love you. I can't live without you." I just didn't buy into it at all. So yeah, that's Twilight. That's my thoughts on it. Will I lie and say I was not entertained? No, I was very entertained reading this story. I just breezed through it very quickly. I think it is a fun time, but objectively, it's not a great book. It has a lot of issues, especially when it comes to the characters, and I think this is going to be a divisive one for a lot of people. I think you're either going to like love it or hate it. Me, I'm kind of in the middle. I had a good time. I had a good time. So that is Twilight. Coming in at number 6 is gonna be The Lost Symbol by Dan Brown. This is a book for me that is kinda it's good, it's meh, like, it's not bad, it's not great. I kinda feel the same way about all of the Robert Langdon books, is they are entertaining popcorn action adventure books that you can sit down and be entertained by for 400 pages, and then once I put it away after a couple weeks, I'm kinda like, what exactly happened in that story? And this is kind of in the same zone. I think that this is my least favorite of the 3 Robert Langdon books that I've read so far. That's understandable because Angels and Demons and The Da Vinci Code, I think, are so iconic. You know, I've seen those movies so many times. I don't think there's a movie based off of this. I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up. But if there is a movie based off this book, I have not seen it. And so some of the plot points didn't stick with me for very long, but it was still a good time. I still enjoyed reading it. It only took me a couple days to get through because it did keep me engaged. This premise of this story basically is that Robert Langdon is now in Washington, D.C., which was cool. As somebody who lives in the US, there are a couple locations in this story that I was a little more familiar with. But Robert Langdon has a very good friend who is in desperate trouble, and he's trying to save that friend. Meanwhile, the CIA is involved, and Robert Langdon isn't super sure if the CIA is his ally or his enemy. So there's a little bit of tension there as he's trying to get to the bottom of this secret. And then there's a main villain in the story who I think is one of the more positive aspects of this book. He was one of the more memorable villains of the series so far. I thought he was actually very intimidating. And there was a story beat moment with the villain towards the end of the book that I actually thought was very effective. So, again, these Dan Brown books, I think they're fun. I think they're easy reading. You can just sit back and relax. There's some cool mysteries and secrets that our main characters have to solve. That aspect is entertaining. But overall, these aren't my favorite books. They're not books that I hate. They're just a good time. So coming in at number 6 is The Lost Symbol. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Roadwork by Stephen King. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it is another book that I have very mixed feelings on. Basically, the main premise of this story is this main character, his name is Barton Dawes. He is going through a really rough time in life. He is just crashing out bad. He had a son who passed away from brain cancer at a very young age. I think he was like 3 years old. That death in his family has caused a major rift between him and his wife. And then to make matters worse, the local government has announced that they're going to be building a highway extension that will demolish where Barton lives and where he works. So he is going to be out of a job, and then he has to forcibly evict his home where his son grew up and died in. He has a very emotional attachment to his home. And the story is about his life spiraling out of control and then eventually what he does to kind of regain some control back in his life. So, the aspect of the story that I didn't really care for was basically the entire first half. I think Stephen King meant it to be this slow buildup of seeing this man, kind of characterizing him, and then seeing all these terrible things happen to him. I was just never super invested in his character until about the halfway mark of the book when a certain event happens that gave Barton a lot of personality and kind of made me see him in a different light. And then from the midpoint of that book on to the ending, I was very invested in his character, very invested in his plight, and overall I thought the ending of this book was extremely satisfying. I love the theme and message behind the story, which is a small voice standing up to these larger forces. It is about a man trying to regain control of his life, trying to make a statement and stand up for something that he loves. And despite the very, very slow start in the first half of the book, I thought that the overall package of the story was very, very solid. So it's not my favorite Stephen King book. I would say I've read about 20 of them so far. And if I had to rank them, I think this book would be close to like the number 12, 13 mark, somewhere in there. But still a great story. Stephen King is always a good writer. And really, in the second half, I became super invested in this character, Barton Dawes. So if you're a hardcore Stephen King fan, I think you should check it out. I would still give it an overall favorable review. All right, y'all. Coming in at number 4, this was kind of my feel-good read of the month. It is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. So, a little backstory. I did not plan on reading this book. I actually didn't even know that this was a book, but my fiance and I went on a little vacation. We went to a Wizard of Oz museum, which I didn't really want to go to, but my fiance really wanted to check out, and it ended up being like my favorite part of our vacation. It was such a cool museum. But there I learned that The Wizard of Oz is a book series. It's actually like 40 children's books written by this guy named L. Frank Baum. I think the first book was published back in like 1900 or 1901. So it's a very old book series. But when we get back to the hotel room, I decide to go on Libby and check out the audiobook. It's very short. It's a children's story. It's about 4 hours long. And I just sit in the hotel room and I listen to this audiobook. And it was such a delightful time. I had a smile on my face the entire time I was listening to it. I think a lot of that has to do with the audiobook production quality. Don't remember the name of the woman that reads it, but I will post a picture on the screen here of the exact audiobook that I listened to, and I'll put her name up as well. but she was such a phenomenal voice actor. She had all these different voices for all of the characters, like the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion. And like I said, it was just one of those stories that made me laugh a couple times. It made me smile, and it was just a very feel good story. It kind of reminded me of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it was written like 50 years prior. It was just pure fun. And the thing that surprised me a lot was the story. The book is a lot different than the movie in some ways. Again, I thought the movie was like the original idea, but now reading the book, there are so many changes that the movie made, and it was cool to just see those different creative decisions. Like the Wicked Witch of the West is barely in this book. She's in like just a tiny bit of it. So that was cool. I won't say anything else. I don't want to spoil it, but this was just a nice time. It was cool. I want to go and maybe read some more of these children's books whenever I have some downtime. And yeah, that is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz coming in at number 4. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. This is a reread for me. I read Dune Messiah about 2 years ago in 2024, and I've been going back through Frank Herbert's Dune books and listening to them in audiobook format, which has been a really good time. I've loved the production quality of these audiobooks, but Dune Messiah is a book that when I first read it a couple years ago, I did not care for this book at all. I think I gave it like a 1.5 out of 5 or like a 2 out of 5, somewhere in that ballpark. But after experiencing the first Dune book and then going into Dune Messiah, there is such a tonal shift. Everything changes. And I guess I just wasn't prepared for that. I kind of had this idea in my mind that Dune Messiah wasn't very good. But in the last 2 years, I've had some more time to learn about the Dune story and what Frank Herbert was trying to say, and upon re-listening to this story, I loved it. So like I said, there's a big tonal shift between the ending of the first Dune book and Dune Messiah. So in Dune Messiah, Paul is the bad guy. He is down bad. People hate him. His jihad has gotten out of control and like 60 some billion people have died. He is in a miserable place in his life, and there are all these different forces plotting to take him down because they think that he, as the emperor, has just wrecked the known universe. And so the book is a lot of scheming and politics. There's not a lot of action at all, and I think that's an aspect of the story that I just didn't really appreciate when I first read it. But now, upon a reread, I love seeing all of the different factions coming together, their reasoning as to why Paul is a terrible emperor, and their overall scheme to kind of take him down. At the same time, I love the internal conflict that Paul goes through. He has this vision of the golden path that he wants to lead humanity on, but he feels like he's so far down this other path and he doesn't know what to do. And it causes him to just be a very horrible and ugly person. And yeah, I loved the tonal shift, especially knowing too what Frank Herbert was trying to convey with these first two Dune books. Paul is not the good guy, and he wrote Paul as sort of this warning to people, letting them know like, hey, you shouldn't just blindly follow your leaders and treat them like gods. Like a lot of times when people say they have your best interests in mind, they don't. Their reasoning is selfish. And I love that messaging. I love what Frank Herbert was trying to convey, and this time around, viewing this story through a different lens really elevated the rating for me. Now it's one of, I wouldn't say my favorite Dune books. I still think the first one and God Emperor of Dune are my two favorites, but I would probably put it in third place now. Something about this reread really changed my mind on it. And I think if you've read Dune Messiah before and you didn't really vibe with it, give it another shot. I think it's worth a reread. So that is Dune Messiah coming in at number 3. All right, y'all, coming in at number 2. And these last two books, I'm going to not talk too much about the plot because I don't want to spoil them for you. I feel like both of these books, I could easily go too far into the synopsis and kind of ruin some of the plot elements. So I'll try to keep it pretty brief. But number 2 is going to be The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is my first Stephen Graham Jones book, and I loved it. So the story is basically about these four guys. They're Native Americans. They're growing up on the reserve. And when they're younger, they go to this land where you are not supposed to hunt. It is forbidden. They decide to go hunting there anyway. And they encounter this massive herd of elk. And they decide to just unload on these elk. They kill a ton of them. One of the elk is a mother who is holding a baby, and both the mother and the child pass away. And then you fast forward 10 years, the spirit of the mother elk has come back and is trying to seek vengeance against these four men. And I know what you're probably thinking, it's a horror novel. How scary can a mother elk spirit be? But in a very short package here, this book is only like just over 300 pages long. This book packs a punch. It is disturbing, it is scary, it is heartfelt at times. It made me feel all of the emotions, and I thought it just was incredibly well written. Now, one criticism I've seen of this book that I think is worth addressing is Stephen Graham Jones has a very unique writing style. It's almost like he's writing in non-grammatically correct sentences, but he is. It took me about 50 pages or so for my brain to kind of rewire itself to get used to his writing style. So I think if you're just starting this book out and you're like, what the heck is this? Why is this prose so weird? I would say stick with it. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but once you adjust to his writing style, it is a very fun journey. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much more about the plot. I don't want to spoil it, but I will say that this is a horror novel that I think I'm going to be thinking a lot about for the next couple years. I would love to give it a reread sooner rather than later, and it's definitely kickstarted my desire to read more Stephen Graham Jones books. So that is The Only Good Indians coming in at number 2. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Slewfoot by Brom. So back in January, I read another Brom book. It was called The Child Thief. That was my first book by that author, and I thought it was really cool. It was like this dark Peter Pan-esque tale. And so fast forward a couple months, I decided to check another one of his books out, and Slewfoot was an amazing time. It was such a good book. The story takes place in, I think it's like the 1600s, the mid 1600s in Connecticut, and it follows this husband and wife. Their names are Abatha and Edward. They live on this farm that is owned by Edward's older brother, and they've slowly been making payments to try to own the farm for themselves. They're like one payment away from owning the land outright when Wallace, Edward's older brother, comes to them and he says, hey, I went into this like business arrangement. I put the farm up as collateral. The business arrangement has fallen apart. And so now this farm will no longer be owned by the two of you. It's being given to this other guy. And you're basically going to have to work for him and never own the farm for yourself. And so Abatha and Edward are extremely upset by that. To make matters worse, and this happens very early on in the book, so it's not like a huge spoiler, but shortly into the novel, Edward dies, leaving Abatha all alone. And this is a time period, like I said, mid 1600s. Women did not really have rights. They were not respected by their communities. So Abatha is going to be evicted from the farm that she was just about to own with her loving husband. And she's going to be forced to live with Wallace, who is just not a good person at all. And so she's upset. She's angry. She's able to convince the town leaders to let her stay on the farm and tend for the land herself, but she has to grow all of the crops on her own and make these payments on time, and she's really struggling to do so. Then enters this character who is a forest spirit. He is a forest spirit that has amnesia. He doesn't remember really who he is or where he comes from, but he meets Abatha and they form a bond. Abatha decides to name him Samson, and Samson has this very strong magical powers. And like I said, they form a friendship and Samson decides to use these magical powers to help Abatha tend her farm, help with the labor and help to make the crops grow. And so things are looking good for Abatha. She's able to maintain this farm. She now has this new friend who is helping her out. But by intertwining her fate with Samson, and as we get to learn who he is, things go a little bit wrong, and Abatha is influenced in ways that she couldn't have predicted. And I'm going to kind of leave it there. I don't want to say anything else, but it was just a very, very cool book with excellent characters, a lot of suspense. There's some great vengeance and revenge in this story. There's some awesome magical moments. It is all around just a fun package of entertainment, scares, violence, and satisfaction that really resonated with me. If you're a fan of great character work and extremely fun mystical elements and magic, I think that Slewfoot is going to be a great book for you. Me personally, I would say my favorite element of the book was probably Samson himself. Getting to learn more about his character, a little bit more is revealed scene by scene as the book continues, and it was a nice little mystery that I thought Brom did very, very well as we start to get these hints as to who he is, what his purpose is, where he came from. All of that, I think, made an incredibly endearing character in Samson. So that is Slewfoot. That was my favorite and number one book of the month. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you found it entertaining. I hope it helped you pick out maybe some new reads in the future. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. And stay tuned for more book related videos on the channel. My name is Christian. This is the Endless TBR, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe out there and go enjoy some good books. Peace out.